Welcome back, everybody, to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea Brown. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for bias, ethical risk, and good governance. So today, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. The first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about getting into the field. So I've talked about this before, and I've been getting a lot of people asking me questions about it. And so I first wanted to sort of give a few thoughts, just sort of off the cuff in general, about entering the field of AI ethics or AI governance or algorithmic auditing in general. And then after that, I'm going to switch gears and get into a little bit of detail about what companies can expect from an audit from BABL, and in particular for local law 144. And I just want to get into a little bit of the details about preparing for an audit. And the reason is, of course, that the April 15th deadline is approaching, assuming that the department will pass the new rules by that time and nothing changes. And so I wanted to go over that one more time, but in a little bit more detail, so that people can really start preparing. Companies can really start preparing if they do want to get an audit from us, and more generally, if they want to get an independent audit from anybody, the kind of things they might need to do. Okay, so let me first address the issue of getting into the field of AI ethics or AI governance or algorithmic auditing, because there's definitely I've been getting a lot of people asking me questions about this. There's clearly a lot of interest, and I think recently, of course, it's not surprising because there is a huge amount of hype right now about AI in general, and ChatGPT has been a big part of that hype. And at the same time, a lot of the worries of what AI can do in terms of negative impact has really come to the forefront, both in terms of public consciousness. People are aware of the ideas of bias, that these algorithmic systems can harm people in ways that it can filter people out of opportunities. It can cause filter bubbles. It can be misused, used for surveillance, all sorts of things. So people are starting to get worried about AI. People are starting to become more aware of AI. And so a lot of people are wondering, what can I do? How can I get into this field? Because it does seem like there's a lot of activity going on. And so let me first say that the field, if I sort of quote unquote the field, is pretty broad. There are a lot of different things that you can do, and for each one of those things, there are going to be different paths to get there. And so let me first talk real quickly about what it would take to work with businesses in this area. So there's two ways in which you can go about this. One is that you are going to try to get a job working with a business. So I definitely highly recommend All Tech is Human job board. It's become a sort of the go-to place for looking for jobs in this field. And so I can put the link in below if this is on YouTube. And so All Tech is Human job board. So there are companies that are looking for people in this area. So the different kinds of roles that you'd see really vary, and it depends on what the needs of the businesses are. And so that's one way. So just directly applying for a job. The second is trying to provide consulting services. So, and those could be sort of general consulting, or if you categorize it as professional services, then audit would be kind of in one of those. So it's a service. It's something that is required and that companies have to pay for. So that's the true broad sort of ways in which you can engage with companies. Now, there are also other areas where you can get into this. So academics, academia is a place where there's a lot more activity in AI ethics, in responsible AI, in AI governance, in just responsible tech in general, tech policy. All of that is happening in academia. And of course, the technical aspects of artificial intelligence as well. So that's another route you can go. So there's working with businesses. There's kind of two different ways in which you can do that, which is directly just applying for a job. You can do some consulting or professional services with businesses. You can go into academia. And then there are also public sector jobs. And there are increasingly more and more of these public sector jobs. So this would be governmental positions. So for instance, the FTC is looking for technologists now, people who understand technology, but also not just understanding the technology, but also know some of the societal implications of that. And so I think you're going to find that there are going to be a lot more jobs in the public sector that require these sorts of skills, or that are sort of the activities that you would do would be the kind of activities that someone who specializes in AI ethics or AI governance or AI policy would be perfect for. And I would also include in that public sector space would be nonprofits. So there are a lot of advocacy groups and who are, or you can also put kind of journalism in the same bucket, because I think they would do very similar activities, focused on the potential negative impacts of AI. Or when I say AI, understand that I mean sort of autonomous algorithmic systems. I don't really care what you call AI. It's some automated system that's making sort of consequential decisions about humans. And so that's another area. So in the public sector, you have nonprofits, you have governmental organizations, you have sort of journalism or advocacy around this. And so, as you can see, there's a wide range of paths to go. You can work with companies, you can work in academia, or you can work sort of more in the public sector. So, depending on which one of those you want, there are going to be different paths to getting there. And so a lot of it, I think the best thing to do would be, if you're interested in getting in this field and you're not exactly sure what you want to do, I would first think about what you're really passionate about. Like what is it that you feel is the most urgent problem in your mind, and the thing that you are most interested in tackling as an issue? Because I think you need that kind of passion in order to really motivate the learning that it's going to take to get to wherever you want to go. And some of you are going to be in different parts of the journey. Some of you might have a lot of knowledge already and just need to sort of find a direction, what to tackle. And so once you have that sort of broad idea, and you might need to look around to kind of get inspiration for what kind of things you might want to do. Another good thing to do would be to start looking at some of these job postings, because what you'll find both in the public and private sector, they're going to have qualifications there. They're going to have general information about what they're expecting in terms of skills and qualifications. And that's going to be a good level setting for you to really figure out, am I at the right place to tackle this? Are they asking, do I have what they're asking for? And I think, at a minimum, all of them are asking for a bachelor's degree. And so there's a sort of minimal bar there for most of these positions. But this is true of almost anything now. Bachelor's degrees are sort of like what high school diplomas used to be, 50 years ago. And so let's assume that you're at that point at least. Then the question is, all right, let's say there are some deficiencies or things that you don't know, or maybe qualifications that you don't have. How do you tackle that? And I think that I think that one thing that that is sort of important to decide for yourself is, what is the kind of minimum level that I need to know in order to start working? Because I think the most important thing is sort of momentum, and actually getting your hands dirty, kind of doing some of this work. And so I would not recommend just launching into a degree. This is, I mean, I have a PhD, so this is coming from a person who already has an advanced degree. And so in some sense, it's easy for me to say, but I also know what it took to get to where I am now in this new field, which is different than what I got my PhD in. And the progress happened because of the work that I did. It wasn't that someone taught me something. And in fact, the degrees are not really out there right now in a lot of this. There are increasingly more online courses. There are more certificate programs that provide this sort of education, but they're still few and far between. And so it's unlikely that you're going to find exactly what you need to fill that niche that you want to attack, that urgent problem that you feel like you want to address. And so my general recommendation is, if you are already at the point where you have a bachelor's degree in something, it doesn't have to be in this narrow field, but you have a bachelor's degree in something, then then you've identified a problem that you feel like, yeah, that's something that is perfect for my personality, perfect for my brain. I want to tackle that issue. Then I think the work that you should start doing is start trying to solve that problem. Find resources, start experimenting, start reading, start writing about it. And I think that's going to get you a lot further. And sort of in general, I think momentum is more important necessarily than direction, because if once you have momentum in a particular, you can change direction fairly quickly, but you need that momentum in order to make significant progress. Let me check. So if you have questions, by the way, please put them in the chat, because this is me just rambling, and so I want you to ask me questions if you have them. Okay, so I've got a question about what's the advice for people who are pursuing AI ethics as a PhD. There's so much happening, where to start? So that's a really good question. I think that if you're pursuing AI ethics for a PhD, then in some sense you will already have you have a niche, right? There is well, actually, why don't you reply back to me and tell me whether you have already a dissertation idea or you're looking for a dissertation idea, because there'll be two different advice depending on what part of the process you're in. If you already have a dissertation idea, so you have a PhD advisor, you know what you're going to be writing on, then in some sense, the best thing to do is to double down on that particular, become an expert at that one thing. That's what the PhD is for. But it can't hurt to start keeping your eyes open for new and exciting areas. So for instance, this happened to me in astrophysics. I had chosen an area. I had a PhD advisor. We were working on a particular topic, but I knew that there was another area of astrophysics which was very exciting to me at the time that I wasn't working on. And I could see that there was going to be a big future in that. And so what I did was, as I was working on my PhD, I started doing little projects on the side and publishing some work on the side that was in that topic that I knew I was going to pivot over to. And by the time I graduated, and after the sort of first year of a postdoc, I had already kind of become an expert in that new area, even though that wasn't exactly what my PhD was on. And some of that stuff actually ended up in my PhD. And so, keep an eye out for those things. And so, okay, so you do have an idea. So my advice is to double down on that one thing. If it's something you feel passionate about, then then it's best not to be distracted, because there are so many things going on. And this is going to be a problem for everybody who is trying to get into this field. There's so much that everyone is doing. There are so many frameworks. There are so many papers being written. It's becoming a very popular field. It's going to be very easy to get distracted by the shiny object that pops out, and that's knowing what to filter out is just as important as knowing what to let in, so to speak. So for me, I'll tell you my experience. My experience is that I chose fairly early on, back in sort of 2018, middle of 2018, that when I wanted to get into AI ethics, the thing that was most interesting to me, or the thing that I thought was I could uniquely have a good perspective on because of my scientific background, because of the technical background that I had, and the knowledge I'd had of ethics at the time, was algorithmic auditing. I felt like that was something I could latch onto. Now, along the way, nobody was talking about it. I wouldn't say nobody. Not many people were talking about it back when I had started. There were some people who, of course, were doing it, but it was not a topic like it is now. And what I did is everything that I read in the field was filtered through that lens of how does this affect either how does it affect algorithmic auditing? How could algorithmic auditing be applied to this new framework? How is this new law or this new policy, or this new white paper, how does that change my what my primary focus is, or does it inform my primary focus? And by doing that, I was able to absorb a lot of new information, but I always had a sort of North Star that was keeping me focused. And it kept me from veering off into a lot of blind alleys, which would have been interesting if that was the thing I wanted, but you always go much further if you have a direction. If you keep sort of backtracking or getting distracted, you're gonna not get very far. You'll see a lot of things, you'll experience a lot of things, that's nice, but if you are trying to make progress, you need to be focused. So my advice for the people who are doing PhDs, if assuming that that's something you're passionate about, that particular topic, then go deep with that and try not to get distracted by everything else, and try to look at everything that comes out in the lens, your particular lens. And if you can comment on it, or you can say something interesting about it from the context of your perspective, then that's what you want to do. So getting an advanced degree is something that is possible, especially if you want to go into academia. So if you want to go into academia, that is the path you have to go to get an advanced degree for the most part. So, but that's really the only one I think that it is critical that you do that. All of the other ones, working as a consultant, working for businesses like directly, public or private, or public sector jobs, you don't necessarily have to have an advanced degree. And so my recommendation is to start generating your own knowledge, because most of the stuff is quite new. And this is a really exciting opportunity to actually make something new in the world. So if you have your particular lens, you have your particular thing you're passionate about, get out there into the world and start absorbing new material, start absorbing new case studies, things that come out in the news, laws that are passed, and put it into the context of your interest and your particular problem, and then start actually trying to solve that problem. And by that, I mean doing research, thinking hard about those issues, and experimenting. How can I solve this particular problem in this particular context? Start writing about it. So writing is going to be important. I know this chat GPT is in the world now, and I think writing, some people feel like writing might be falling by the wayside, but writing in a lot of cases is clear thinking. And to write something succinctly, bringing together a bunch of different elements in a unique way through your unique lens, that is always going to be relevant and new. And so keep that skill sharp and exercise that skill. Now, the other side benefit to that is another issue for breaking into this field, which is exposure. Because most of the time, I mean, there's so many people in the world, right? There's a lot of people working on these things. Why is it that anybody is going to know about you or your ideas unless you put them out there? So exposure is a really important thing. Now, we're in the world of social media, and social media is one vehicle for exposure. Academic publications is another vehicle for exposure. So in academia, that's really important. Just writing, so blogging or writing articles for sort of general consumption, that's another way to get exposure. And so what I recommend is that as you start this journey of actually trying to dig in and solve a particular problem that you're passionate about, it's really important for you to start putting yourself out there to the world. And whether that's Twitter for you, whether that's LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram or Substack or the Medium or writing a blog or writing a newsletter, that's kind of irrelevant. That's not necessarily irrelevant because there are different audiences in different places, and depending on who you're trying to reach, it matters. But in terms of starting, it's all exposure and it's all practice for you getting your ideas out there and letting them be criticized, or letting you get some feedback as to what people think about those ideas. So long story short, if you are a person who wants to get into this field, if you are a person who is trying to solve a problem in this field, and you're studying and thinking hard about it, there is no reason for you not to be producing material content that you put out, wherever that is. LinkedIn, Twitter, doesn't matter. Substack, doesn't matter. Put that out there. And so if I had one piece of advice that I would have you take away from this, if you are not posting content on your topic that you're interested about, this is assuming now you've found the thing that you're passionate about, then you are doing yourself a serious disservice. Because how can you expect anyone to know that you are really good at this unless they have seen the work that you've done? You have to demonstrate it in some way. Now, one way of demonstrating is getting a degree and having letters of recommendation, and that's like a traditional path for doing that. That's still going to exist. However, there are other paths now. And I've seen people who make their career on being very vocal and putting their ideas out there, and a lot of people knowing about them. And then they get really good jobs, or they build really good consulting firms, or they simply become thought leaders. And so you need to get over any kind of imposter syndrome you might have and just start putting material out there, because people are normally fairly generous, except maybe on Twitter. But in other platforms and other media, people are normally pretty generous and happy to hear about this stuff. So there's a question about, don't I think that there's too much content generated with little variations about ethics, guidelines, frameworks, risks, etc.? Okay, absolutely. So I think, so that's a really good question. So what we're seeing is exactly this. We're seeing a lot of people putting a ton of content out there, both, and I think LinkedIn and Twitter are the two kind of biggest places where that's happening. And then to some extent, there's sort of individual blogs and people writing Medium articles or Substack articles. But mostly it's sort of the social media, LinkedIn, Twitter area. I think the answer is yes. But this is why it's so important. But this is why it's important for you to have your particular niche, because what you're seeing right now is a ton of people getting interested in this and doing exactly, sort of listening to my advice and starting to put things out there. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think most people are able to filter through that and say, oh, I've read this article before, or I've seen this before, or these people are repeating very generic phrases that everybody knows already. And so you're going to enter a phase where you're going to do that. And that's totally okay. because you have to get into the habit of making that content. And so in the beginning, I definitely recommend you just literally take an article, you post it, and you write something about it. Write some little comment, right? And in the beginning, your comments will probably be very generic, and they're probably going to sound a lot like everybody else's. So I think the important thing to do when you're starting out is to be very intellectually humble when you do that. So the thing that would annoy people, let's say, or that I might find annoying when I see this happening, is when people sound like they're reinventing the wheel, or they sound like they invented the wheel, but it turns out they're just saying the same thing everybody else says. Don't sound like that. Just be very humble and say, this is really interesting. And then say a thought, but it doesn't have to be sound like you're trying to, or you've discovered something amazing, right? Just put it out there, draw people's attention to it. Now, what will happen is that as you start narrowing down your particular niche, so as you start focusing on your particular area that you're going to specialize in, it becomes increasingly less likely that you're going to say something generic, and more likely that you're going to say something that's unique and interesting to people. So I think that it shouldn't stop you just because everybody's talking about AI now. Don't let that stop you also talking about it, because here's what's going to happen. You might you hypothetical person, let's say, that's thinking about this and getting frustrated that, oh, I've been thinking about this for years and now everybody's talking about it, and I'm just going to kind of get annoyed and not do anything. Well, guess what? The people who are doing this and talking, even though they're annoying, they're eventually going to get better at what they do. They're going to start recognizing new things that are unique and interesting. They're going to start coming up with new, unique and interesting concepts. And by the time they start doing that, they would have had an audience of people who are listening to them. And so do you want to be the person who nobody knows about or is not listening to? Or do you want to be that person who they're listening to? So clearly it's better to be the person that everyone's listening to. So all you have to do is avoid that mistake early on of trying to sound like an expert when you're not yet, or yeah, that's basically it. You know, people who just don't know what they don't know, and just still put it out there. I think that's the answer. You just have to put it out there and then start really trying to contribute new and interesting things, and you won't be one of those people. You'll just be somebody who's actually contributing to the field, because there's so much we don't know. There's still so much research that needs to be done. None of this is really settled. AI ethics is not settled. AI governance is not settled. Algorithmic auditing is not settled. AI policy and how we're going to deal with emerging technologies, that's not settled. And so there is a ton of work to be done. And so you just got to get in there and sort of turn the crank, so to speak, and try to sift through all that crap and find the interesting things. But very good question. Any other questions? I'm happy to keep taking questions. So another question, a question about specialization. So do I recommend specializing from the beginning for a specific domain like healthcare or mobility, finance, etc.? I think the answer is yes, that's better. So there are some topics where you don't want to specialize. So like something like algorithmic auditing, because algorithmic auditing is going to cut across a lot of different sectors. And so for that, like I try not to specialize. I will talk about medical AI or machine learning or algorithms used in the medical context or the financial context or the HR context or autonomous vehicles, because I know that my niche cuts across those. Now, there are some other of you who maybe have some domain expertise already in one of those sort of verticals, or just have an interest in one of those verticals. And so in that case, it makes a lot of sense to start specializing, because then you know exactly who your audience is. And if you're consistently, because I've even seen it with the kind of content that I create, sometimes I'll post something or write something that is relevant for the medical field, and a lot of people will sort of find it interesting. And then my next post will be about autonomous vehicles. And then those people who just started following me will be like, oh, why now he's talking about autonomous vehicles? I don't know, what is he talking about? And so in terms of growing an audience, or in terms of getting people who are listening to what you have to say, being more narrow and they knowing what to expect from you is probably better. It also allows you to be more of an expert, because you don't have to like if I want to say something about the insurance industry, I have to make sure I know what I'm talking about. How does the insurance industry work? How does underwriting in the insurance industry work? I'm willing to go do that work, but it is work every time. And I have to make sure I understand and don't say something silly, and that I'm contributing something that's interesting. But that's a really good question. Okay, another question. What is it that I think is the right way to chase AI ethics for social media or dating applications? So, yeah, I think social media is one of the areas that there's been a lot of attention on, but it's still seriously unsolved as a problem. And right now there's a huge amount of regulatory interest and legislative interest in social media platforms, and dating apps would be like something very, very similar to a social media platform in a lot of ways, where you have recommender systems. And I think there's a ton of different niches that you could find within that particular subspecialty. But for that, I feel like having so if I were to go down that route, let's say I decided I want to specialize in social media or dating apps, it would be really important, I think, to start really understanding the technical side. If you don't already, like maybe you do, and that's going to be a huge benefit. But I think a lot of the ethical problems that are going to arise, or this, you don't even necessarily want to call them ethical, they could be sort of just compliance or potential harms that are going to arise in those platforms, that are arising in those platforms, come from some of the details of how the technical algorithms work, what they optimize for, how often they're updated, what kind of personal information do they use or do they infer about people. And so if I were to go in that area, I would, and I wanted to stand out as someone who was sort of better than the average person who's thinking about that, is I'd want to combine the AI ethics with some technical understanding of how those tools work. So spend more time trying to dig into the details, go talk to developers, show up at a conference that talks about bias and recommender systems and things like this. And there are conferences where people talk about that, and think about it from a broader policy perspective. I think that's the way to go. I think you can get ahead of people if you understand the technical side, in addition to the ethical and sort of compliance or policy side. I don't know if that helps. Let me see. So we're talking about the AI lifecycle, design, development, deployment, and maintenance. Can we use the same tools and knowledge for all of them, or do we need different skill sets and methods and tools? Okay, very good question. So there are some skills that are going to cut across those. So for instance, I think risk assessments in general are something that could be deployed, or that are useful in all of those phases. And for the most part, the skills that you need for risk assessment are pretty broad and can be applied through the whole life cycle. That being said, there are some more technical skills. So it doesn't even have to be technical in the sense of like literally coding, but there are sort of technical knowledge about, let's say, how data sets might potentially cause bias, and ways in which you need to inspect or govern data sets as they get put into incorporated, or even like how the data gets collected, right? There are some of those things that are unique to that early process of sort of design and development that don't necessarily don't occur later on. But that being said, those skills can be used. The same types of skills can be used later on. I'm trying to think of something that's very unique to one of these. Yeah, a lot of it is that there's a broad framework that lays on top of a lot of this. So there's sort of governance frameworks which are sort of almost independent of all of that, of all of the different the AI lifecycle, and the governance and oversight and the policies and procedures, once they're in place, are sort of independent of that. When you start going down into sort of the risk assessment, how do you identify risk, which I think is the most important of anything. I think that's the most important skill to hone and to have, and to be able to demonstrate that you have it. That risk assessment, there will be subspecialties within there, or there'll be sub-knowledge or domains, which you'll need to supplement for the different parts of the process. For instance, when you're talking about the risk associated with the continuous deployment of an algorithm, nowadays, a lot of what people do is continuous integration, continuous development, CI/CD, where they're continuously modifying the algorithm and redeploying it, monitoring it, updating it. That process, you need to understand that process in order to understand the risk, because there are different parts in that process where risk can happen. Someone could not follow a procedure and they deploy an algorithm when it's not ready to be deployed. Somebody's not checking a particular key performance indicator like they should be. And how do you avoid that, missing those sorts of things? So, there's a general risk assessment skill set, and then there's some sub domains within that, which are, you're going to have to learn some new thing, maybe not new, depends on who you are, but you have to learn some things that are real specific to those individual life cycle, parts of the life cycle. That's a really good question. Okay. So if there are any more questions, let me know, because I'm happy. In fact, I probably won't have any time to talk about the New York City thing, which is totally fine by me. I can do that next week. So if there are more questions, I'm happy to take them. So I do have another one. All right. Okay. So this is a question basically about the software engineering background required for AI ethics auditor, and what kind of background do I suggest? So and the point is that there are some auditors that don't necessarily have to have a technical background and can still audit. And I think this is true. So let me try to phrase this in the right way. I think that there is a baseline level of knowledge of algorithmic systems that an auditor will need to have. So by that, I mean, you need to know what machine learning is. You need to know the different types of algorithms, different types of programming languages. You don't have to know them, but you have to know of them and roughly what's different about them. The common frameworks for machine learning algorithms, the common algorithms themselves, what's the difference between supervised learning versus unsupervised learning versus reinforcement learning versus some hybrid of those. Within supervised learning, do you know what the difference between regression and classification is? There's some broad level things that what's a large language model? What's natural language processing? What's computer vision? How does it work? Where are the problems in it, right? You can know all of these things without necessarily knowing how to code or use them. So, and I think that that level of knowledge is necessary, because we see from auditing companies, we have to know what kind of algorithm these companies are using. We can't just know that it's an algorithm that has an input and output. That's because that doesn't inform the risk that much. It helps immensely, and it's required for us to know roughly what kind of algorithm it is. They don't have to give us their intellectual property, but we do need to know that it's a classification algorithm, or it's a supervised learning problem, and that they're getting the labels for the supervised learning problem from, let's say, candidate data that comes through their platform or something like this, right? And so you do need to know that. Now, that's the baseline level, and you don't need to know any coding to know that kind of stuff. However, there has to be someone on a team that is doing these auditing. So imagine, auditing, let's take a really big case example, like for the Digital Services Act. Digital Services Act is going to require these large online platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter, or search engines like Google. They're going to have to be audited for compliance with the DSA by auditors. Part of that is going to be assessing risks, like societal risks to EU citizens, or and also sort of algorithmic assessments of the algorithms that, let's say, serve ads to people or recommender systems for how they populate their feed. For that kind of auditing, it will be important that at least one or two members of that team do know the technical details. But that doesn't mean you can't be part of an auditing team and you be the person who doesn't know all those details. That's totally okay. And I think that there's room for auditors. So for instance, we have auditors that work with us who only focus on risk assessment. They're ethicists. They've done risk assessments for socio-technical systems before. They understand how that process works and how it should work. They don't know all the technical details. They know the level that I just mentioned broadly, but they don't know the technical details of how those algorithms are implemented. They're part of the team, and they're auditors, and they submit opinions, and they examine evidence for things like risk assessments. So long story short, there's a baseline level. You need to know roughly the technology that you're auditing and where the risk can lie, but then you do not have to be a coder to be part of the team. But there does have to be someone who understands in sufficient detail as part of the team that is required. So hopefully that answered. That was a long answer to a fairly short question. So my apologies. Okay. All right. So another one. So another person is saying, that they're interested in whether you need the technical knowledge. What books or courses do I recommend to gain the technical knowledge without becoming completely technical? Okay. I'll be totally honest. So there are courses like on probably Coursera or edX that will sort of skim the surface at a particular level. I actually think our course is the best one for that. So it's a bit of a plug for our course, but basically the course that we teach, which is called Algorithms, AI, and Machine Learning, so it's AI for AI ethics and policy. Basically, it's the AI portion that you need to know. We essentially go through that high level. Now, the problem is that we go at the high level because we focus on, here are all the different kind of algorithms that are out there. This is how they work roughly. There are some coding exercises in there where it's like you open up a Python notebook and you sort of change some code around, but that's really just to get you sort of your hands dirty, so you actually understand what it takes to do a little bit of that, but you don't need to know coding necessarily to do it. That being said, we've had people who've gone through the course that have found that part difficult. And so I can't say that it's just for a totally non-technical person. You do have to have you have to not be afraid of math. You have to not be afraid of coding, but we cover that really high level stuff. So our plans are actually to rearrange. We're going to be meeting this week, actually the whole team, for us to rearrange our training for our auditors. And so we're going to actually piece together, probably the most likely thing is that we're going to break apart that AI course, and there will be a sort of low-level version that's that high level with no code at all, but still just the whole broad overview. And then there'll be another deeper level that will have the code involved. And that will be for those technical people who have to be part of the team who actually know how to do the algorithms. So, but in any case, if you send me an email, I think my email is probably all over the place, but if you want to send me an email or a LinkedIn message, I can send you some links to some different courses that might be useful. All right. Let me see if we've got anything else. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So I really appreciate everybody showing up. Hopefully this was not too much of rambling on my part, but I know that people are interested in this, and I'm interested in having more people in the field. So I really would like that. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please like and subscribe so you can see when we post videos. We post them at least every week. And thank you very much and have a good day.